Welcome to AEC Stories. This is former SM-3 Dempsey of the USS Mount Hood. And today I have a great guest who is also a Navy artist. A lot of people have seen his work. John Franza, former ice seaman, who was in the Navy a long time ago, but you're going to have to listen to find out those details and find out more about John. So let me introduce John. How are you doing today, John?
Doing great.
Well, this is your first podcast, and we plan on doing a podcast together. So let's talk about your Navy background and how did you come to join the Navy? How old were you when you thought about it? And tell me a little bit about that transition.
I was about 17 and a half. Transition went like this. We went through 4 recruiters at that time in 1965, one being the Marines, the Army, the Navy, and of course, the Air Force. Now, my friend who joined the Air Force told me that the recruiter said to him, do you want to fly over Vietnam or do you want to walk through it? So he decided to join the Air Force. Anyway, I opted for the Navy simply because, we do have above the sea, on the sea, and under the sea. And the schools that I selected from the Navy recruiter were, I had a guaranteed school because of being a high school graduate at that time. And the first choice was photographic intelligence. My second choice was illustrator draftsman. And my third choice was photographer's mate. So naturally, the Navy being what it is, made me an ice seaman.
Yeah, well, let's just put those 3 together and that equals ice seaman. How interesting.
Yeah, exactly. So every time when I got to boot camp, it was basically them telling me that those billets and those schools required you to have previous experience in those 3 areas. And of course, IC at that time was a critical rating. So that's how I ended up doing IC work.
So let me ask you, well, how was, where'd you go to boot camp and what was that experience like for you?
Well, Great Lakes was interesting because, of course, at that time they were trying to push people through boot camp as fast as they could to get them back into the fleet because of what was going on with Vietnam. Because you not only had Vietnam, you had the Russian bears trying to take over the Mediterranean at that time because they thought that we were so busy with Vietnam. But the reality is that when the Russian bears threatened us to take over the Mediterranean, we decided to double the fleet in the Med. And that led to, almost a near couple of conflicts because at that time, Russian trawlers would be outside our harbors at Charleston and Norfolk, Virginia. The Russians would come in and try to harass you, et cetera, et cetera. But, it was one of those things that being in the Navy at that time was completely different than being in the Navy today. Navy today is so technically advanced compared. The Navy I was in should have had sails on the ship.
the good old the Pirates Navy. There you go.
Yeah, exactly. That's really what it was.
You talk about the trawlers. That was my job to spot them and stuff. You talk about, they're called the AGI, the Russian spy ships. And they would hang out just offshore, off about 20 miles or 25 miles, whatever the international waters line is right there. So they weren't in our territory. And they were just waiting for ships to pull out and drive around them and like, we are pulling in your intel. We have a device that can listen to the radio men, hitting the keyboards and try to figure out what they're sending, right? That was kind of their plan. I doubt you could listen through that much steel with any clarity with a microphone. So I don't know what they were using, but that was their goal anyways. But our ships, our fleet was probably close to double the size of what it is today, I think. At least it was when I was in. So, the strategy that you're talking about, it's kind of hard to outnumber the American Navy back then. We were huge. We had more ships. We had a bigger fleet. So, yeah, we could be in Vietnam and we could be anywhere in the world at that time and still outnumber everybody, right?
Yeah, and the thing was, when I joined the Navy, you asked me about boot camp and the boot camp experience, and I don't mean to regress, but the strange thing about boot camp is when I was going through it, it didn't have any effect on me, except for the discipline and the training. But there were a couple of guys that asked me that question when we were going through boot camp. They said, Franza, this doesn't seem to be bothering you at all. The reality is I just went through 12 years of Catholic school. I had nuns that were tougher than most of the commanders. So it was, you know,
Discipline wasn't a novelty to you, and I'm sure. Well, you did mention, and you were already into were you into sports and stuff already before you came in?
No, well, I couldn't play sports that much because I had rheumatic fever as a kid. So it kind of, disabled me a little bit from playing sports. I did get to play football, to some degree, but, when I went into the Navy, there weren't, when you're on board ship, there aren't too many areas to play sports, unfortunately. You know that yourself, having.
Oh, yeah. There's paddleball, what?
Yeah. I mean, maybe, when you have swim call, you do a little, water volleyball or something, but that was about it. But
we had weight rooms on our ship. I don't know. Did you guys have weight rooms?
Yeah, we did have we had a weight room down, forward of the superstructure, and it was down in one of the cargo holds that they have all the weights down there. So that's where we would spend our time. We'd spend our time working out, lifting weights, et cetera, because, when you were doing, at that time, they used to have tropical hours. And if we were down doing what they call a springboard, the springboard operation was done in the Caribbean with the other ships, and we would refuel the carriers that were on their way to Vietnam, headed for the Panama Canal, whatever. But we used to have a thing called tropical hours, where you would work for possibly 6 hours a day because of the heat. You couldn't work any more than that. So it was kind of nice. So you worked 6 hours, you had the rest of the time off. So you'd go up forward, go down in the hold, and start working out for a couple hours a day. It was really kind of nice. I would compare my Navy to writing. When we were doing unreps, we were real busy. At 3:00 in the morning, you're refueling ships. But I can't say, I think I mentioned this to you before. The closest I came to an incoming was somebody throwing me a can of Budweiser, right?
and I know that's not by design. I mean, we all, you get stationed where you get stationed. There might be some guy that's Action Jackson that wanted to be on the front lines, but he gets stationed in an embassy in Rome. And you're like, wait a second, what happened? Now you're a Marine and you're going to work at the embassy in Rome, but I wanted to be with my guys. Yeah, and then that happens to people. But that's cool. It all serves a purpose. It's all part of the same mission, though. It is.
That's exactly right. It's the luck of the draw. And I felt guilty, for years and years and years, having not gone to Vietnam. But the reality is, it's kind of like the luck of the draw. And
True.
I did have guys I was stationed with that volunteered for swift boat duty over in Nam. And I thought to myself, I said, that's really great. But these guys were career-oriented Navy guys. They were going to make a career out of the Navy, and they knew by going to Vietnam, it was going to have an effect on how fast they were going to be promoted. And I got it. And if I would have had a thought about being a career Navy guy, I would have put my hand up and I would have sent myself over there, and I wouldn't have had a problem with it. The thing I have is I admire the guys that did go over there. I had friends that were on the Forrestal when the Forrestal blew up. And they didn't get killed, fortunately, but they were there. And, after we got discharged and we sat back home in my hometown, we would talk about those kinds of things. And the thing of it is, being on AOs was not, I make light of it, having not been in the combat, but being on an AO was pretty dangerous duty. We carried 9 million gallons of avgas, JP5, and black oil. And the reality was, when you hit a swell, like going through Cape Hatteras, and you were trying to refuel ships and do an unrep, it was pretty dangerous work. We had one guy that got hit with a wave when we were going through Hatteras and broke his back in 3 places, drug him down the pipe deck. So they sent out a chopper from the mainland, took him back. So anybody who thinks that just because you weren't in combat in Vietnam is sadly mistaken. It was dangerous for anybody. I don't care if you were on a tin can. I don't care if you were on an aircraft carrier. I don't care if you were on a tanker. It didn't matter. All those guys were putting their butts on the line no matter what ship they were on. And the reality is, if you go up on the bridge on a ship in the military, in the United States Navy, and you look down at the crews at that time who were 17, 18, 19 years old, we're talking kids. So when we were at sea doing what we were doing, we weren't sitting in some frat house in some warm college campus, right? Slugging down beers and having a good time and chasing women. We were out there participating and making a contribution to the country.
You joined the Navy and you knew that you could go anywhere, and that's enough. That's just where they put you. And that's what I believe. Because it's not like you come out of boot camp and you're a guy that wants to hide behind the lines. And there's a lot of those guys that get moved forward into the front lines. Like the more they try to go one way, I just want to get stationed on shore duty doing this over at this base, working at this supply or something, that maybe that was their intention. Maybe they joined and said, I'll do supply and I'll go down and I'll be in a swift boat dropping off supplies to the guys in the middle of the Delta, right? Could be anything, it goes any direction. But when you join, having gone out to war myself, there was guys that went AWOL and they're like, I don't want to be part of this. I met a girl and I'm like, dude, I'm married. I'm going to war. Stay the fuck off my ship. Don't call here again. I hope you understand. And I was like, listen, man, I just don't want someone like you next to me if I know that you're not going to be able to perform under pressure, because I want someone to have my back. And the guys that are going, not everybody was poker faced, like, yeah, I'm tough, I can handle this. But a lot of people, you could see the fear of the uncertainty because you knew you were going into a dangerous area. But the truth is, like you say, you could just be on an unrepped ship and there's the cables that snap and rip people's legs off or heads off or decapitate or whatever. There's the threat of that oil. It is a dangerous machine. You're in this big moving thing. You're doing an unrep. You're hooked up to another ship. There's ships that have bumped into each other. There's cables that have snapped. There's cargo that's been dropped on people. There's people that get stuck in the elevators. I mean, you've got fuel. My ship was an AE. We were, an ammo ship, and we did a lot of unreps. We were loading the bombs. You were loading the fuel, right? And then there's the combination of the two, the AORs or AOEs or whatever they are. And unrepping is dangerous. You got two ships cruising side by side in the ocean, and the ocean isn't a flat, smooth road. You're not on a train track. And the guy's going to keep that rock steady. A lot of moving parts, a lot of people at different levels of tiredness, of worn outness or energy levels. And the job is demanding. And I got a lot of respect for the bosun's mates that do the unreps and all the different people, or the gunner's mates doing the ammo loads. There's a lot of work. And there's different dangers in different parts at sea, whether you're hunting submarines or you're cruising up and doing, spy ops and rolling in on, taking, Snoopy teams offshore or something. There's always dangers, or you're flying on the plane. Everything's got that variable of things that can go wrong. It's the ocean, It's the ocean, man.
And it's 12,000 feet deep,
Right. Well, I mean, I had friends that served in the jungle in Nam. People that were either like LERP or people that were special forces or people that were infantry that I knew as a kid. And, it's not all fresh in my memory because this is 27 years ago. I was hanging out with them because a lot of them got a job on the base I lived in Italy because they didn't want to come back to the world. That's, we say go back to the world when we'd say going back to the States when we'd be stationed overseas or back to the States, right? We didn't say back to the USA, man. It was just back to the world. That's what it was. And those guys, they were in a very dangerous, precarious situation. If I send you into a place, let's just say it wasn't a war. What if I sent you into a jungle that has poisonous snakes and alligators, poison spiders and everything else? And there's no, you get to march through it. It's 50 miles long. The fatality rate's going to be about 70%. Just go through it. You might be lucky. You might not be, because that's the place you're going. So yeah, that's a different type of danger, condensed, high likelihood, high probability. But same with a guy who's a hot shot who goes and fights those big forest fires. They go right in the middle of it, so there's a lot of variables, but my point is bringing it back to you. You were out there and you served and you helped the ships there. It's all part of the mission. Whether you're the guys loading the bombs, loading the fuel to get the aircraft carrier that much further across the sea, but most aircraft carriers were nuclear, so probably not them, but their planes and stuff needed fuel, so they needed to be able to fly. So there's a lot of things that come with that. And, you served and that's all that really matters. That's how I take it.
Most of the time when we were doing the bird farms, it was avgas and JP5. for, like you said, for the planes. But, I don't think for an 18-year-old kid to experience what I experienced, most people will never get to see this in their lifetime. And it was one night we were doing an unrep, and the USS Independence, the aircraft carrier, pulled up to port. And then on starboard, I watched this thing coming at us, and I didn't realize what it was. But it was the USS Columbus, which was a heavy cruiser at that time. And when that thing pulled up alongside us, now we already have, the lines over to the Independence. We have the Columbus coming up next to us. It was like watching a New York City block.
It's 5:00.
Sorry about that.
We'll keep that on the podcast. Fantastic.
Sorry about that. But, to watch these as an 18-year-old kid, after going through boot camp, you're really an 18-year-old man. And to watch this happen, both these ships coming up alongside, I guess it was around 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. It was just the most impressive sight I have ever seen in my entire life. It left an impression on me to this day. It was the most exciting thing I have ever done. Unreps were, bar none, made my career in the corporate world seem totally boring. And I will tell you, if I had to do it again, I would do it all over. We put in 4 years, but as you get older, as you and I have talked about in the past, as we get older, we don't understand the influence that the military really has on your life. Now, if you were a screw up, if you got BCDs, if you were getting captain's mast all the time, you were getting thrown in the brig, you might have a different outlook on the Navy as you get older. But the reality is that for me personally, my wife, as you and I talked about, just went through fighting cancer for 18 months. She passed away last month. My Navy training made me the most excellent caregiver that I could be. It really did. Because I knew, and I truly believed in that no man left behind concept. And when I had to take care of her, when I had to change her diaper, when I had to change, take her into the showers, when I had to hold her and carry her, that was based on what I learned from the Navy and also from my family. My family was a big influence on me too, particularly my father. But the reality is, I don't think I could have done a good job if I wasn't military trained. There's a lot of guys that duck out on spouses when stuff like that goes down. But I have to say that I have to thank the Navy for a lot of things I have today. If it hadn't been for the Navy, I wouldn't have been able to get a VA loan. If it hadn't been for the Navy, I probably wouldn't have never gotten an education. If it hadn't been for the Navy, I probably wouldn't have hearing aids today. But the Navy, to me, just is part of me. It's part of my makeup. It's my wife would not have been able to be buried in a military cemetery today. So all of these things come back, and you don't realize the importance of them until you hit about 45. That's when this whole Navy training starts to set in.
Oh, yeah. We talked about that. I felt the same thing. I get out, I'm like, okay, I'm done with this. All you're trying to do is make me swab the deck. And what you're doing is you're young. We used to call them 19 and know-it-alls. Having been there myself, I'm like, my boss doesn't even know what's going on. But he knows 25 things that could go wrong out at sea that you haven't anticipated because he's seen them. He's been serving for 15 years. He knows what's up. You're like, this guy's a dimwit. He doesn't know anything about whatever. And the guy's not. He's there for a reason. And he's built up that sea time and that experience, But I think the military, when I was done with it, I was like, I was watching so many movies. I was enchanted by being a big businessman or, discovering what I could be. Like now I'm going to have my own identity under my own Navy, myself, whatever. And I make the reference in other podcasts. I'm like, I'd be on Alameda, on NAS Alameda when it used to be active and there's jets flying and carriers in port and all that. And I'm going to exchange and I see this old man wearing a hat with all kinds of veteran buttons and, different things he belongs to that are military oriented. And he's buying a pair of socks. He's like, wow, what a bargain. Great deal. And I'm like, why is this guy give a crap about a pair of socks? Shouldn't he go out there becoming a millionaire and be rich and driving a Porsche and be happy? This is my young idiot mind, thinking that was the solution because I was falling for the propaganda in the media. I wanted to be, Superman because we could be anything. But, if everybody's millionaires, who's going to serve the coffee and who's going to farm the grass and who's going to, take care of the people in the hospital and so forth? It can't work like that. So I'd look at this old man, and now I am that old man, and I'm happy to get a deal on a pair of socks at the exchange and not have to pay tax on it, But It's funny, and I'll be happy to wear my Navy hat or my salty dog hat, that shows my, allegiance to my fellow brethren of the military. And here we are today talking all because of it, because it comes back, it visits us, and all that stuff those old men were saying when we were young. One day you're going to miss this boy. You're going to remember it was the best time of your life. And we thought, no, it'd be better when I'm rich and I'm driving my Porsche down the coast of Pacific Coast Highway and going to Malibu for a dinner party. That doesn't have the same depth of this, right? That's what you're saying too.
Basically, that's what I am saying. It's like someone said to me the other day about officers and corporations and the respect that officers should get in corporations today. I'm talking about American business. The way I feel about it, when I was in the military, the officers earned your respect. Good officers earned your respect. Great officers earned your respect. Corporate America doesn't get that sometimes with what they call their executives, their officers, whatever. Fact of the matter is, they don't think they have to earn the loyalty or the respect of the employees a lot of time. In the Navy, there were officers that we had that you'd follow into hell. There were other officers that you basically wanted to throw over the side. So yeah. We had you had that you were dealing with people that kind of had a greater degree of integrity and ethics and honor than you have out here today. And fortunately for me, I'm 71 years old, so I really don't have to deal with it any longer.
No. Now you can sit back in the stands and watch the other team play and go, I knew that was going to happen. Yep. Like I had my former operations officer who I served with on my ship. We did a podcast and he became, I believe, an XO in Naples. I mean, he's a great squared away guy and he is a big corporate business guy in management doing well. And, he had brought it up. He says at one time that a naval officer was like the most prestigious career, like people revered it, like, a naval officer. That is the maximum you could be as a person. This is before being a .com billionaire and, whatever, right. And it's true because they get the job, they go through hell and then they get they go through all the testing and they don't just let anyone become an officer. So now you've got the job, you've got the management job, but now it's your job to get that respect from your troops, show leadership and understand. You don't just show up and order them around like a bunch of janitors. These are people that might teach you something. And the smart ones got that. And they worked with you and they appreciated what you did because you made them look good. And together you accomplished a mission. Every football team has a coach. So you get to have that. But within that team, there's the special teams coach on the football team. There's the return punt coach, whatever, there's the physical trainer. Those are the chiefs and the LPOs and everything that makes that team work together in unison. So yeah, that's kind of like the makeup of the ship right there. Go ahead.
I'll tell you something that when you're 18, 19 years old, as an ice seaman, we used to have to show the movies on board ship, right? And they would pay you like $2. I think I was making at that time about $22 a week. I believe it was 20, if that much. But you have to remember, everything's relevant. A pack of cigarettes was 12 cents when you got into international waters. But we had to show the movies either on the mess decks or, we showed them to the enlisted on the mess decks. Then you had the wardroom, up on the upper decks. So one time, an officer called me and he said, we need a new bulb for the projector up in the wardroom. And I had been in the wardroom. Now, keep in mind, I'm recently out of boot camp, and I'm an FR, a fireman recruit at that time. So I go up there to change the bulb in the projector. And this was kind of a turning point in my attitude about staying in the Navy. We had tin trays down on the mess decks, right? The enlisted guys. And when I went up there to change the bulb, I noticed the captain's steward was setting the table for the officers. And he was putting down this beautiful silverware, and he was putting down these beautiful cups and saucers, and the plate had the Navy insignia in the middle of it with a really beautiful gold trim around it. And I'm looking at this and I'm saying to myself, the only way I'm staying in this Navy is if I become an officer. It was a change. It changed my attitude quite a bit to see that. I mean, it was sort of like this great double standard. Officers were treated this way, which I understood to a certain extent. But enlisted guys are down there, trying to eat off these tin trays. I thought, what a comparison. But you're right. And then I realized the officers earned that. They earned that. If they spent the time in college getting a degree, and if they spent the time and they were smart enough to go through OCS, okay, you earned it. But I almost had a deeper respect for chiefs than I did for officers to a certain extent, because I knew that chief was going to get my ass through anything that was going to happen. He was a seasoned guy. He was out at, a lot of them 15, 20 years in the Navy. A lot of the guys that we had were former World War II veterans. These guys had gone through combat. I'll tell you a little something about my father-in-law, my former father-in-law, I should say. My former father-in-law spent 27 years in the Navy, and he never really talked very much about it. And when I was down in Florida the last time, he always liked me, even though his daughter and I divorced. We still got along. We still talk. Frank would not talk very much about the military. He was on the USS Arkansas, and he opened up to me when I was down there, and he said, John, I'm talking to you about this because you are former Navy. You'll get it. He was on the USS Arkansas when they invaded Normandy, right? And he was telling me about their one responsibility. The Germans evidently had these gun mounts that would go in and out of the side of the mountain. They had these tunnels built inside the mountains, and they would roll the guns in and roll them back out again. And his job on the USS Arkansas was to blast these gun mounts of the German emplacements, okay? He said they fired the guns so much they had to go to Philadelphia, right, get the barrels changed out, and then he went to the Pacific and fought in the Pacific. So this guy went through Normandy. He goes to the Pacific to fight the Japanese. And, I mean, these incredible stories that these guys have, it would be nice if they could have had them document it, and I'm sorry I didn't have a recorder there at that time to be able to get the history. Fortunately, he's still alive. Fortunately, I'm going down to Florida. I'm having my wife's memorial dinner down there. So I'm seriously thinking about interviewing him while I'm there. But
that's a good one. Imagine you just painted a picture, and then you are a painter too, but you're painting a picture now, my friend. Here's the picture I see. You're a young man. You go over and you see everywhere you look, 360 degrees, war. Normandy was huge. It was a huge operation. When you see the movie interpretations, it's massive, and it's like just massive. And then you go off to the Pacific, and all you see on the other side of the world is a massive war again. So shit, there's like no safe haven hardly. You're like, your perception as a young man, the whole world is covered in war. Interesting, huh?
Yeah, I see. Sure. You think about that. I mean, a war in the Pacific, war in the Atlantic, and major naval battles. Naval battles at that time. I mean, and I forget how many sub crews we lost. I mean, it's incredible. It really is. I don't know how we won that war to a certain extent, simply because we were fighting it on two fronts. I don't even know where we found the manpower. I mean, just to do all the manufacturing in this country, to, support the fleet and the Marines and the Army and all. It's just incredible. It's mind-boggling when you think about it. It really is. Of course, we had our allies. You know, you had the British, you had the French, you had all the free world countries at that time, you know, fighting against the Germans and the Japanese. But still, it's remarkable that we won. It just amazes me to this day.
It's interesting. I mean, you look at it. Remember, you know, the posters of the woman rolling up their sleeves, working in the factories. Everybody contributed back then. We've become more of a fat cat society. If we were ever in that situation, it would be a little rough to get everybody off their phone and their computer to roll up their sleeves and hit the factory. You know, that's what I see. I'm not being critical. I'm just being realistic.
I don't know if we really gear them up that fast. But I don't think the next war is going to be anything like the wars we've fought in the past. You know,
nothing like it. Nothing like it.
God forbid we have the next one. You know, I hope that doesn't happen. Both for, you know, your children, my children, our grandchildren, whatever you want to call it. The reality is, you never want to see anything like that happen. Vietnam was strange. It was really weird. I mean, I felt bad for the guys. It was bad enough wearing a uniform at that time. When people, you know, I mean, literally, they would spit on me. I mean, I had one guy spit on me at a train station one time, and I knocked him on his ass. You know, I could have probably been court-martialed for it. But the reality is, the guys that were coming back from Vietnam to be treated the way they were treated at that time was, I mean, it was horrendous. But it's 50 years ago. I get it. You know, it's time to move on and get over that. Yeah, but that was one of the things that got me into Operation Never Forgotten. And it's working with post 9/11 veterans that are coming over that do have PTSD. The suicide rate in this country is unreal.
It's high.
It's very high. It's very high.
More casualties than are actually happening in the battlefield, I would estimate, on average. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the comeback. It's the hard to integrate back into society. Because you have 3% of the country protecting the other 97%. The other 97% are not as tuned in to what these men and women stand for and what they're serving and what they're going through. So, you know, I listened to a great guy give a speech. He's a war reporter, right? And he talked about it. He's like, he talked about his experience, and I'll try to wrap it up in a nutshell. But he said he was over there with some guys in Kandahar somewhere, and they were being shot at, and he's with some like special forces type guys or infantry guys. And he's like, you'd hear the little zip, zip, you know, you hear the sandbags getting hit by bullets near you. And he goes, but I was with my tribe, and his tribe was 22 people. And that's kind of how we were built as human beings. You know, it's us against the world. And that's when you're on your ship. It's you against the world. It's your infantry, you know, your infantry unit. It's that where those camaraderies and that team and that family, everybody who serves on the mission and struggles together. So what he said was, he goes, I wasn't freaking out there. He goes, but I came back, and he goes, I'm in New York. I go down to the subway, and I have this huge anxiety, like I'm about to get killed or kill myself. Like I'm overrun with all the energy of all these people. Because you become hypersensitive being away from large groups of people and all this. And it's really hard to integrate back into society. And, you know, in the military, there's a culture, there's a family, there's a group of people. It might not always go your way, but you know which way it's going to go every day you wake up. So I think that's a big problem. I think that's why a lot of guys come back. They've seen some traumatic things. They've been redlining on fight or flight. Like, some guys may have just been in the field, and they're told, like, you're going to go in there, you have a 70% chance of not coming back. So they make it back. Maybe something doesn't happen, but going to a field, and if I tell you, once you go stand in that field out there, you can be attacked by, there's bears that could kill people. There's, alligators that can kill people. There's a murderer lurking in the woods. You may or may not make it out of there, and you're out there for, 15 days. And pitch black at night, you hear noises, you hear this, you hear that, and every day you're worrying about dying. And that fucks up your system. That puts you into this, it sneaks into your subconscious, and it lives there because they have not found a cure for it. The best thing is counseling, and being around other like-minded people, I think, is the strongest thing that you can do. I don't have a lot of faith in big pharma. I have a lot of friends with PTSD that are wackier than a Goonie bird, because It's just, okay, we stopped the screams in your head, but now we made you see the life in a distorted, crazy way that it's not what you can't operate. Now you're not communicating good. Now you're not sleeping right. It's like uppers and downers. Are you taking speed or sleeping pills? You'll never live a normal life if you keep jacking your system up, right? So that's what I get from it.
Yeah, and the other thing is now you have a lot of women being put in harm's way too.
Oh
today.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we didn't have women on board ship when I was in the Navy, and I don't think that happened for many years after I got out. I was discharged in 1969. And, you know, the fleet at that time, if you were a wave, you were in administrative capacity. You know, I mean, it's just completely changed. And for the better, I think. I think it really has. The only thing that disappoints me is the fact that I truly believe that our fleet really has to grow. Because if you take the Chinese and the Russians doing what they're doing, particularly the Chinese, we're buying all their goods. That money is being invested back into China, who's investing it into their Navy. The way I understand, and somebody may come on here for another podcast to correct me on this, but I understand they have a conventional subs now that you can't hear. The Chinese Navy does. So they're investing all this money in technology to advance their military. And here we are with, I believe, about maybe 400 ships in our fleet, if that. Last time I heard,
I think it's around three, a little over.
Around there. It's incredible how we think that if something goes south in this country, that we're going to be able to protect ourselves. And everybody goes, well, it's really not going to be a target-rich war at that time. It's going to be fought nuclear. So, you know, an aircraft carrier is going to be nothing more than a target. I don't believe that. I still think when you pull an aircraft carrier into a port, trust me, it makes an impression on people. They realize that
I know the power of them. I was in the Gulf. That was pretty much a naval war. It was Navy versus the ground, Navy aircraft carriers. Yes, there was definitely some Air Force participation, and the Army and the Marines were there too. But a lot of the bombing was done by the carriers, and they wiped that shit out quick. One of the fastest wars in history, and like less than 100 casualties, or a little bit over at the max, from just regular. If you have that many people mobilized, if you have 500,000 people somewhere, there's people that are going to have a heart attack, have a stroke, eat a poisoned goldfish. I don't know. That's just the odds that's just natural statistics that if you're an insurance adjuster, someone's going to die. If 100,000 people are hanging out for a week, someone's going to die in that group, because that's just the law of human nature on numbers, right? But otherwise, the aircraft carriers, those things are so badass and they're seeing you 1,000 miles away or more. They see you now. You know what I mean? Exactly. And the jets that they have today, and the jets they have on the Harriers, and the helicopters that they have today, and the gearing of automation is what I see more of the future. We have ships that can hunt for submarines with nobody on board, like a drone. We have drones, you know? Go ahead.
When I was you walk in the CIC room, and what did they used to call that marker board they had, that clear plexiglass? The
Mo board, yeah.
Yeah,
they could position everything, yeah.
Right. So I'd walk in the CIC, and I was, of course, IC-man, so I was down where we had the gyro compasses and stuff like that. Well, I was fortunate enough to go on board the USS Gulf, keeping in mind that I came out of the Navy in 1969. I went on board the Leyte Gulf in around 95 or 96. And I asked the chief, I said, would you mind taking my wife and I into CIC? So we walked into the CIC room, and it was like one big video game. It was incredible. I mean, all these flat screen TVs, all the flat screen monitors they had to work on. I mean, it was incredible. And I asked the officer who was in there, I said, let me ask you a question. I said, now naturally I was on tankers. So, I mean, we were pretty much a sitting duck. We had 4 gun mounts on the ship, you know.
Yeah, you could fend off some pirates and little boats.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
you were not going to have a pirate ship cannon battle with a destroyer or something.
Junks or something like that. You might be able to have a chance. But I walked into this CIC and I said, let me ask you a question. I said, from the time you see a boat, I said, till the time you can knock it out. I said, how long does it take you to make contact? He said to me about 5 seconds. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know, because I find that to be incredible with the amount of technology. Now, we're going back to 1995, which is 23 years ago. Imagine what the technology is like today. I bought my wife, when my wife was fighting cancer, I bought her a ball cap. It was the first ball cap issued to a civilian other than the crew of the ship. And it was from the USS Zumwalt, right? And every time she went to chemo or radiation, she wore this ball cap because she said she was going to kick cancer's ass. And that ball cap meant so much to her. But can you imagine the technology that's on the USS Zumwalt compared to the USS Leyte Gulf 23 years later?
It's like the Red Baron's biplane compared to a stealth bomber.
Yeah, exactly. That's really what it is. Yeah, that's what it is.
I'll tell you a funny one. My friend and I were on the USS Hornet taking a tour. It's a museum now in Alameda, right? And we were looking inside, because we're technological guys. We're looking inside this capsule that was part of the NASA mission, right, that they picked up. And we're like, I go, Barry, how much computational power, how much computer power does that thing have in there based on what we're looking at on the boards and the electronics and all that? Because it doesn't have the modern technology of the space movies, right? So I go, how much horsepower and technology does it have? He goes, because basically we just sent a fax machine into outer space and it came back.
Well, what did they say about the space during the Apollo missions? I believe it was that, and I had gone through that. When I talk about that, we had real heroes when I was a young guy growing up before I went in the military. We had real damn heroes. We had guys like John Glenn. We had the Apollo astronauts. I watched Neil Armstrong step on the moon. I was still in the Navy. It was July of 1969. I was going to be discharged in September. We had real heroes that we were raised with that we could admire and look up to. I don't think people have that today. They don't have those same heroes with that same substance that we looked at. Now, maybe I'm probably totally wrong and talking like an old man. Who knows? But the reality is I think that's what's missing from our culture today in our society. Football players, what are they making? They're making $10, $15 million a quarterback, 400, 500 million bucks. I mean, it's just so far out of reality today that a kid doesn't look at him as a hero anymore. He looks at him as a commodity where, he's making $500 million. That's what I want to be like. It's all about the money and not about the person any longer. It's strange.
Oh yeah, that's the interesting thing, because the machine has taken place of the man. What you're talking about, I dialed right in on this. Okay, if a flying car came out tomorrow, it wouldn't be amazing. It would be expected at the rate that technology is progressing today, right? If tomorrow somebody goes flying car, like, oh yeah, you just took a drone and you made it fly BFD. Flying car. Wow, that's so cool. Whatever. What's the laws? When can I license one? Cool. And I get it self-driving. Okay. I expect that. I've seen self-driving cars already. Nothing shocking me, right? But if I was in 1968 when I was born and I'm looking at a flying car, that would seem like something out of Dick Tracy or something out of Star Wars, something just amazing.
Right. Yeah.
But today, I mean, look at the movie Star Wars just for fun. And that was like the biggest high tech movie when that came out, I believe in the 70s. I get a special viewing of it when I was a kid. And I didn't really pursue it after that. I didn't keep staying into it, but it was my favorite movie for a while. And when you lived overseas, they roll it out and then they take it off. They send it over there for the military to view. And it didn't show up in the base theater for probably 2 years. Like, we get it early. Everything was lagging behind back then, right? So we were not on top of things like, hell, Blockbuster was probably ahead of us, and then, Netflix and so forth. The speed of delivering the content is faster now. Well, back then, looking at an X-Wing jet fighter, whatever the thing that Darth Vader drove, that strange globe with two wings on the side that are kind of cocked in. That looks amazing then. Now it just looks like a drone. You can make a drone look like that. People have. Now there's drones. Okay, we got Darth Vader in the sky. He can shoot at you. Big deal. We expect that now. Back then, we were seeing men and women achieve things that were impressive because it was man-made achievements. Now everything is technologically achieved. I look at automation. I look to the future and I go, you know what? Your special forces right now, I admire you. You're a badass human being. You have a high level athletic performance. You have a sharp, keen mind. You have heroic guts to do what you do. But how long will it be before they replace you with a robot or a drone and not have to send you out there, deal with the casualty or pay for your disability, because we're going to send in this flying robot thing with machine guns, right? That's more likely to do that. We want to go rescue this guy. Okay. There's a hostage in a room. We're going to send in 3 drones, 3 roller robots. They're going to go bash out the room. They can see through the wall. The other one's an extraction thing. It'll pick the guy up and carry him to the whatever. And one will get rid of the terrorists. Like, it'll be a standoff against technology, which no one's going to win. I've got you, guy, gun to the head. Yeah, it's okay. I've got a laser beat on you from 2,000 miles. You're done. It all sounds like Star Wars and space shit. But really, what I'm saying is that technology is going there. And a man running a marathon, that will be cool for a while, but it will go the way of the cowboy. You know how the cowboy movies were really hip and then they stopped making them as much and people stopped watching them. But that was the only reference back then in your era and me growing up as a kid in the 70s and the 80s. We're like, oh, cowboys, they were so cool. They were so tough. But now, 20 years later, 30 years later, 40 years later, they're gonna be like, that was Navy SEALs. They were like the cowboy. I could see that because it's going to become the guy behind the video screen console operating the thing. And just to take it a step further, I'm future pacing this. People are like, what the hell is this podcast saying? My wife works in technology. She works with AI, artificial intelligence. She's not building these robots or anything. But people in her field, I could see them develop algorithms where these things are thinking on their own. And we don't need you operating the drones out of Nevada because the drone does it by itself because the computational power is coming. That's where we're changing. That's why I do the podcast that talked about the way it used to be, about when, men were men and, women serving were tough women too. And all this people at sea were all serving as a force, the camaraderie. That's what we miss from that. Because we've been tuned out, right? Staring at our phones.
Right. I mean, how many Chuck Yeagers can you think of today? What do you think about it?
Not really.
I can't.
Justin Bieber, he has a great YouTube channel.
There you go. Yeah. Right. And, those guys are few and far between. I mean, and they were real duty badasses in their day. And you looked up to them as a kid. And it was incredible. When I came out of the military and you had gone, you go to school again, you have nothing in common with those people. I just did not have anything in common with those people that were on campus. And the only people I had anything in common with were people who did serve. And the reality is, to this day, my 2 best friends, 3 that I have, that's the other thing, we limit our friends and we limit our contacts with people to a certain extent because we want to be associated with people who are real stand up, got their feet on the ground, salt of the earth kind of guys. And the 2 friends I have are former Marines. One's combat Marine Vietnam. Actually, they're both combat Marines from Vietnam. And the other one is a combat Navy guy who was in Vietnam. And I'm probably the only guy that wasn't in country amongst those friends that I have. And they're incredible guys to be around. They really are. And they don't talk about Vietnam and they don't talk about being duty badasses and they don't talk about how tough they are. They're the greatest husbands and the greatest fathers you ever want to meet. They're incredible men. And it's just good to be around them. But the more I thought about it, I don't have any friends that are really basically corporate types that never served. I just don't. And that doesn't make me a better person for having served. what it makes me a little bit smarter in how I make decisions in my life. And I think that's what military training does to you. You don't make as many screw ups as a lot of other people. And then when you do screw up, you can face your failure just as much as you can face your successes. I think that's what it does for you. It makes the failures, which we're all going to have and we are all going to experience, that much easier to deal with, because you don't sit there and whine. You don't sit there and cry in your beer. You dust yourself off. You get the hell up and you move on and you get going. And that's why I thank the Navy so much. I know I sound kind of crazy thanking them so much, but they really meant a lot to me. I'm the guy that's going to have a flag on my coffin. I'm almost looking forward to it.
I totally understand, and it's like you and I just started talking and all of a sudden we get along so quickly, but that's because we understand we're from the same kind of tribe. And that's what it is. And it is like that reporter said, and I'll reference his name somewhere later because I don't want to take away from him, but the guy, Sebastian Younger, I think is his name. He had a great point about PTSD. He nailed it. And it's not just PTSD. If you didn't experience such trauma or whatever, it's still hard integrating back into the civilian world. Some of my friends got out of the Navy. I have a good friend, Tim, who was an electronic warfare specialist. He walked right over and got a job at Intel that paid double or triple that he get paid in the Navy. And he's been there 25 years. And he's never had to look back because it was just one smooth sailing. Me, I bounced from job to job, here to there, company to company, ups and downs, divorces. I bounced around like a fucking ping pong ball. So when I'm like, what's going on out here, right? Now, if I knew what I'm telling you now as I'm closing in on 50, boy, I could counsel myself better. And boy, I hope the young veterans listen to this podcast eventually and take a chip of that salt and say, you know what? That's a good idea, old man. I'm going to apply some of that. Thanks for the extra situational awareness in life. That's what we're trying to give them too,
it comes down to that window theory I told you about. When you're 30 years old, your window's pretty big. You can screw around a little bit. You can waste a little time. You can take a lot of risks, take a lot of chances, which I did. I did take risks and I did take chances. And fortunately for me, some of them paid off. But I took those risks and those chances based on the fact that that's what I learned through my experience from my parents. But today your window's small. So time becomes more important a commodity than money. It really, truly does. And you don't want anybody screwing with that time. And so it's like, you remember 20 years ago, telemarketers would call me and I would get in a conversation with them. Now they call me and it's click.
Right. they used to call more genuinely, but it's changed.
Goodbye.
A lot has changed. I mean, we're when we were young kids, you before me, looking at the world, imagining what if the world had all this intergalactic superpower, like computers that you could talk to each other on, and you could own your own radio station, which we are starting our own podcast together soon. Right. I'm looking forward to doing that with you. For people listening, the last details with John Franza and Len Dempsey is going to be coming out, and that's going to be a very entertaining podcast. The content will be a mystery until we reveal it because we're still working on that. But it will be Navy related and life lessons and good stuff to listen to,
and a lot of fun, a lot of crazy. Yeah. Should I tell them the Chief story? Should I tell them that one?
Sure, go ahead.
There was a family opening on the ship. The people could bring the crew could bring their parents on board, their aunts, their uncles, their brothers, their whatever, distant cousins, whatever it was. And this day, the ship was open, and this woman comes on board, and her son's part of the crew. So she's talking to a CPO, and she says to him, Chief, she said, can you guarantee me that when my son goes to sea, he won't get hurt? And the answer from the chief, without missing a beat, was, ma'am, the only thing I can assure you of is that your son will not get hit by a cab. And I think that's being in I really do. I think that sums up being in the fleet. About when you go out there and you get beyond the channel marker, you don't know what's going to happen. And at any time, at any given minute, on any given day, you don't know what's going to happen. I know the first time we went down through Hatteras, and of course, like I said, we had 9 million gallons of fuel on, so we're riding low. Our pipe deck was almost submerged. That's how low we were to the water. And it was incredible because I came out, it was like about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I guess. And we were hitting a tremendous storm. I mean, the swells and the troughs were incredible. I mean, it was the first time I ever experienced this. I came from the Pocono Mountains in Pennsylvania. That's where I was born and raised. I'm what they call a coal cracker, right? It was coal mines up there. I come from a very hardworking class of people. This is the first time I had ever been to sea. And as I'm looking at these swells and I'm looking at these troughs and these waves breaking over the bridge, I'm looking at myself going, what in the hell did I get myself into? After a while, I never got seasick. And the reality was that I started to love being at sea. I didn't even want to be in port anymore. I just loved being at sea. And to this day, as you know, Len, I do the paintings. And it's strange that this happened a couple months ago during my wife's illness, that I was looking around for subject matter. I was trying to figure out, what do I want to do when I grow up as an artist? So I paint a lot of seascapes, and I've had, a certain degree of success with those. But I started to think to myself, what do they always tell you? Paint what you love. So I did this painting, which you've seen, of the USS George Washington leaving the port of New York with the signal flags reading, "Never forget." And I always like to do paintings that have some type of emotion attached to them. Well, it was just one painting amongst all the other paintings that I do. Yeah. But my wife looked at it. She said, that's a beautiful piece of work. She said, I can tell. She said, you had a lot of emotion in that. Well, I put it up on Salty Dog on Facebook, as you know. And in a matter of maybe 8 hours, 16 hours, I had 1,000 hits on that thing. Yeah. And that's why I think I found my calling, unfortunately, late in life, that's the subject matter I want to paint. I want to paint what I know. I want to paint what means a lot to me. And I want to paint things that bring a certain amount of satisfaction to guys that served in the fleet, not only in the fleet, but you might have been on an NAS station for your entire career. I went to, and I believe you went there too, before my discharge, about 18 months, I served in port services on board tugboat, right? I was on tugs for a long time. And our job was to bring in the FBMs that were coming in from patrol at night. And they would come up the Cooper River in Charleston. And I remember seeing an FBM for the first time, and it was one of the most incredible sights I ever saw. It left an image with me, just like I told you about when I was on the USS Truckee and we're refueling the Columbus and the Independence at the same time. They would come in at nighttime, and they were gray, but they almost looked black. They were incredible sights to see. And when you brought these things in at night, you would say to yourself, how would anybody in the world want to even think about screwing with us? It really was a great feeling. And I feel that way to this day. But those are the things that have inspired me to love to do the subject matter that's related to the U.S. Navy. And I'm hoping to do a lot more of them in the future.
Oh, I can see that. I can see when we launch our podcast and we talk about art and we, get some people in those ships, and you'll probably end up doing work with them and, designing something for them. I can see that going into a million different directions. And, you talk about Salty Dogs, who are my good friend James Spears, who you'll get to know shortly. I've talked to him about about him, excuse me. And it's like he started a group with all like-minded sailors, and it's a really tight group on Facebook. And, it's really a great place. I mean, they're going to be planning a big event in San Diego. That's going to be revealed on there. If you remember, you can see it. But you could see John's art on there because James has built such a like-minded group of people, like people that aren't saying mean things to each other, trolling, getting political with each other, just keeping it Navy. We didn't talk about that shit when we were in the Navy. We talked about where are we going, boats, where are we going to go have a couple beers? Hey, what are we doing today? What's the challenge for today? What are we going to do? What are we going to unload? Let's go. Let's see what kind of record we can break in this unrep, or what we can do, and how many planes we could launch, or whatever you were doing. And the Salty Dogs is kind of how I found you, and you found me, because I said, does anybody have an artist to redesign my podcast cover, which I'm considering doing still. And someone says the best artist I know is John Franza, and you weren't really active on Salty Dogs. It was a guy that was a member of Salty Dogs. That's how the community works, right? And then all of a sudden you and I are talking, and you're going, what does this guy want? You're thinking, and I'm like, what does he need? I go, I see his artwork. That shit looks expensive. I wonder how much my podcasting is going to count. But I think we found a better way to work together and help each other, because that's what I'm about. That's what the community's about, is to help each other and to enjoy our time together. And the internet is connecting us where we didn't. You know how you have your 3 friends? We're less disconnected now. That will grow. Right. We'll add, and that we'll bring them, and they'll meet new people, and it'll be like the best times of high school or the best times of whatever it was in life. But you're right. The corporate thing, I never found that. I have friends from businesses I was in, and I'm still friends with them. But it's different when you're on mission with somebody.
Right.
It's different. It's different because you have that bond. You depend on them. They depend on you. Everybody depends on everybody. And it goes back to that tribal thinking, right? So,
And the other thing is some of the greatest satisfaction I get is doing the pro bono work, like I did for the USS Stark. They wanted me to design a T-shirt for them, and I did that. And I do free artwork for Operation Never Forgotten, etc. Because I will tell you, I think it is a gift. It is a gift that we're given, and if you can help people in some way, shape, or form, or an organization that is a truly nonprofit organization and not out there trying to stick it to people to try and make as much money as they can. I wouldn't do free artwork for those people.
Right.
These people have a genuine interest in what they're doing, like the USS Stark. That memorial is coming up in May down in, I think I could be wrong.
Mayport or something, or Jacksonville. I forget.
Mayport, Jacksonville, somewhere around there. And, it was truly a pleasure doing that work, because when you're doing the names of each one of the crew members that lost their lives on the USS Stark, you almost feel as though you don't know them. Of course, you never served with them, but it really hits home about
it does.
How dangerous it is out there for these kids. And you see these guys, these men and women that are out there today, right? I'm sleeping much better knowing they are on watch out there. Those ships are sailing the seas as we speak at the moment, and they are out there being away from their families, being on deployment 6-9 months at a time, and they deserve all the respect they can get, not only from us as being former Navy, but also from the people of this country who if you didn't serve, I'm not saying that you're not a patriot or anything else, but if you didn't serve, you don't get it.
Well, you can't know until you've been there. There's a lot of things in life. I can't speak on being an NFL player because I haven't done it. No, there's certain things you don't know until you're there. And then, you talk to an athlete like, well, didn't you just run fast and catch touchdowns? He's like, dude, I had broken legs. I had hip replacement. I had back pains. And I still did it, and I was on all these meds. Like, then you find out the strife and the struggle, and that's the same thing with the military. But I like that what you're doing for people with artwork, and we will do it by helping them leave their legacy behind by doing more podcasts and creating a bigger podcast network for military people. Because, whether it's you and me on the show or you interviewing somebody else and vice versa, we will get more people's stories out there and leave a legacy behind and not leave it. Not that I'm hating the History Channel. There's a cost there. to get 1 hour of TV, you get to sell ad space, probably 50,000 or more for that show to fund it for every time it airs, or, so that's television. That's the television model of distribution. Or, if you're watching it on YouTube, there's a production cost of that show. You can't do them for free. They're pulling all this historical archive data, footage. They're getting licensing. They're getting this announcer. They're telling a nice linear story. But how could you tell the story of, let's say, a battleship? Unless, I had Billy on here who was on the battleship, and he told what life was like as a cook. Well, we get to still hear it from a gunner's mate, and we get to hear it from a signalman. We get to hear it from an engineman or a snipe or a seaman. All the different rates out there we want to hear, and as an officer's perspective. And it gives light to the story because everybody was on the same set, acting in the same play, but they all had a different perspective from their eyes, how they were experiencing and seeing it, and their backstory, their background, where they were from, where they grew up, how they came to this decision is the interesting part, and the journey. And then what does it become afterwards? Right. So good.
One of the great things is, one of the greatest examples that I used to show people when I was doing marketing for banks, et cetera, was, and you can think of a ship this way. Now, we only had 250 guys, but if you look at a bird farm, you're looking at 5,000, 6,000 crew members on there. But if you break it down, have you ever seen the credits at the end of a movie? I have a tendency to look at the credits at the end of a film simply because of the number of people that it takes to have created that film.
Right.
And a ship could be broken down just like film credits. How many people does it take to run that ship? Really, when you think about it, break it down. Instead of gaffers, you have enginemen. Instead of lighting, you have electricians. Instead of, actors or actresses, you have crew members. I mean, all of these people that it takes to do these things, if you think of it that way, particularly on an aircraft carrier, of the difference in everybody's positions on that jobs, the responsibilities they have. And I think the learning experience from it comes down to, I respect someone who pushes a broom as a janitor in a school as much as I do the principal that runs that school. And again, I think that comes from the Navy, of having respect for everybody on that ship. I'll give you a good example of something. There was a kid that just came out of boot camp that they really thought was sort of like slow, if that's what you want to call it. And I was on a YO doing something at that time. It's a yard oiler. It's like a small tanker. We were tied up to a ship, and I had foul weather gear on because it was raining, and it was in Charleston. It's raining like hell. It's cold. It's miserable, etc. Well, the guy had thrown a Jacob's ladder over the side of a ship, and I jumped from the YO onto the Jacob's ladder. And when I did, my foot slipped because it was so wet, and the guy did not let the slack out of the ladder, which I should have checked for. I fell down between the ship and the YO, and I could have been crushed.
Wow.
Well, this kid that they didn't think had any sense was the first one to think that the current was coming out from the Cooper River. That would push the YO away from the ship. He untied the bow line, right? And then he untied the stern line, and the YO was lifting out, right? The guys up on the ship were letting it drift out so that I could get a hold of that Jacob's ladder, which was in the water, and pull myself out. From that moment on, I never had any disrespect for anyone, no matter what their job is, no matter how intelligent you thought they were, because every guy knew exactly what to do at any given moment to save a life. And that's what the most important thing was in the Navy, is that you covered each other's ass and you took care of each other. And that's a very difficult thing to find out in civilian life.
That's true. I mean, the guy might not know much about French literature, but he can sure patch up your leg if you have if you have a marlin spike stuck through it, and do all the right things, a tourniquet and control the bleeding and all that other stuff. Yeah, that's where that comes in. So today we had a good long run, and we're gonna be doing a lot of podcasts. Where can people find your art? Do you have a specific website where people can look at some of the stuff that you do?
Yeah, most of the commercial things, I don't have a site yet for the paintings, but there are paintings on coraflot.com/J Franza. I better spell Coraflot. It's COROFLOT. Again, COROFLOT.com/J Franza, FRONZ as in zebra, A. And then if people want to call me about prints of the USS George Washington, they can do that. My phone number is on that Coraflot site.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah, and we'll be revealing more things as we go along. People got to be tuned in. But stay tuned for our other upcoming podcasts with John. It's going to be called The Last Details. At least that's the plan right now. If I find for some reason I can't do that, whoops, it'll be called something. But you'll know about it, and you guys get to know my new friend John and find out a little bit more about his story. There's more to dig in. There's more sea story to this. Today was a nice, good general topic, a good listen. And stay tuned. Like us on AEC Stories on Facebook. I need more people liking that page. I'm getting thousands more listens than I am getting followers on there. And leave us a nice comment or recommendation on there on the page and or the group. There's an AEC Stories group. Check out, if you haven't already, one of my favorite groups on Facebook, U.S. Navy Salty Dogs. That's run by James Spears. That's an amazing page. That's a really true Navy, great camaraderie, good humor, just good, positive people. You'll make some friends in there. It's a good place to hang out if you're former military. And then, like us on iTunes, AEC Stories on iTunes or AEC Stories on Podbean. Give us a review, like us, subscribe. Please do. I know a lot of you are listening. I know sometimes these apps can be a pain in the ass to download on your phone. But it's well worth it because if you download the podcast, you listen to it, you want to know the next one, or you want to be able to open up your phone and look at all the 46 other ones or 45 other ones I've put out there and listen to the guy from the Sark, listen to John Franza, listen to, another of my shipmates from the Mount Hood or a guy that was on a battleship. There's so many stories there and we appreciate you listening. And with that said, anchors away, my friend.